Yeah, it's good to be back here. Thanks so much for the also the privilege to be the first one to speak in this very, very important gathering. So I want to thank the collective for giving me this opportunity. I've been in your beautiful country many times before, but it's always a pleasure to be here. My roots go back in Finland, as you heard. So I'm a school teacher and policymaker and academic and activist back home there. And now our home for the last 7 years has been a beautiful city of Melbourne. So that's where I came from yesterday. I live there with my family and two boys who still go to school. And this is a very important, I always remind people who dare to listen to me about these things, is that you're not only listening to an academic or scholar, but you're also listening to a parent, somebody who cares a lot about education wherever it happens from the point of view of a parent. It's a very, as you know, it's a very different perspective. You ask different questions and you kind of think about different things if you have your own children in a school system, and that's what I do. I've been very much engaged in Australian education issues and developments during the last 10, 15 years really, but I also work in different countries around the world. So I try to bring you a couple of things this morning. One of them is it's a kind of a big picture. I think it's very important in times like this to take a little time and ask this question, that so how the world of education is going. My experience is that people often, if you're a principal in a school or teacher, you don't have time to think about those things. So you're so much occupied by your own kids and teachers and communities. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that. It's very interesting because it raises a lot of questions that we need to ask. Then the second half of my time here is around the question that so what should we do, so what? And that is, I know a little bit about your situation here right now in New Zealand, but not enough to make any specific comments. But we can start this conversation based on probably a little bit of these things that I'm telling you here. If you have difficulties in understanding what I'm saying, it may be because it's early in the morning. It's very early in the morning for me because I'm 2 hours behind you. But it's also it may be because English is not my mother tongue, it's my third language. So I speak Finnish and Swedish as my mother tongues. So if you don't understand me, I can switch into either of those two languages. And then you probably understand nothing. Is there anybody who speaks Finnish here? Or Swedish? A little bit. Lite? Okay. Oh, okay. Kamla Norske, okay. That's good. All right. But if you don't understand something, just put your hand up. I'm very happy to repeat or explain if it's about my broken English here. All right. Are we good to start? Are you sure? Yeah, all right, okay. One thing that I've learned working with people and being a teacher myself is that we love testing and assessments, right? Do we? Like you're going to have even more of the assessments in your school system soon. So I thought I'll give you one before we do anything else. And this goes back to my early days when I was teaching mathematics and physics in a high school in Helsinki. I sometimes realized that my students were not really keen on what is supposed to happen in that lesson or course. So I said something like this, that I'll have a set of questions for you. If you stay awake during my class or this course, I promise you one thing, you're going to find answers to all of those questions as we go. And it always worked. Yeah, my kids were like, okay, let's go. So I'm trying the same thing with you. And just to elevate this external motivation a little bit higher, I can tell you one thing, that there will be a prize, award for one of you, and it is one of my favorite books called In Teachers We Trust. Subtitle says something like, The Others Pay Cash. But one of you will get this book in the end, depending on how this goes, and without any delay, let's start with this one. So I'll keep it this easy. So if you have a pen, I would like to ask you to just make a note of your own answers. So I'm going to ask you to think hard about the questions, and there's only two options. whether my statement there that I'm asking you to think about is true or false. And remember, in times like this, somebody might say that, but there are also those alternative facts. But in this case, this game, there's only either true or false, okay? If you don't have paper and pen, maybe you can use your device or just your good memory. But there's one thing that you must not do. You can't change your responses as we go. So when you realize that the answer to this question is coming, and you realize that you were wrong, you can't change it. That's what I told my students as well. It's called, how do we call that? Cheating. Yeah, you can't cheat here this morning. This is an honest thing. So are you ready for this? Yeah, 3 different questions. Some of them are easy, some of them may be harder, but I ask you to think very hard about those things. The first one says something like this. Over the past 15 years, there has been virtually no improvement in the learning outcomes of students in the OECD countries. And these are all evidence-based answers, by the way. Very simple thing. Second one says that teachers account for about 60% of the variance in students' achievement in school. Then the last one is very different. It says that a bat and a ball cost $110 in total. If the bat costs $100 more than the ball costs $10. But this is where you can use your intuition. Okay, just like policymakers use their intuition when it comes to hard questions. All right, so let's. If you stay awake, you'll find answers to all of these questions as we go within the next 40 minutes or so. All right. Now let me start with this big picture thing. And again, this may be something that you say that, okay, I know this already. I know what's going on in the world, but many of you here will say that I haven't really had time to, do all that research or think about these things because I'm so busy and occupied in my own workplace, right? Put your hand up if you're principal here, school principal, you're leader. Put your hand up if you're assistant, you work in a other leadership role. Good. How about a teacher? Excellent. How about a student? Good. Put your hand up if you don't know what you do. Almost everyone. Okay, all right. So let's look at it doesn't matter, but this big picture thing is important. And it's also interesting because, we have much more data and evidence and research to tell this story than, for example, if I was here 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So now we know much more about how things are globally. One of those things that we do know that has been evolving during the last 20 years really is this idea of global educational reform movement. And I know that some years back it was a big issue here in New Zealand that teachers and leaders were campaigning for the kind of resisting this global education reform idea because it started to show that this type of direction that we saw in some countries, many countries actually, was not leading to where we were supposed to be with the kids. So those of you who are not familiar with this germ idea, that I like the acronym. It's a kind of a telling that it's been a kind of an idea in education policy world that has been acting like a virus, traveling from place to place and infecting systems and schools and cultures so that things don't go as we want. So just to remind you, there are a couple of things, few things there that have been kind of a central ideas in this germ movement. That is nothing, it's not official policy by any organization, it's just a kind of an evolved movement idea globally that has similar component. Like at the heart of the germ has been the faith in school choice and competition. School choice almost always brings competition between schools and principals and teachers. And this is what has been an evident part of the germ around the world. That people believe that just like in a business world, we can improve what schools do and teachers do if they are competing against one another. When they see the results of the other school or other teacher and then they try to do better. It's a very simple, very easy to sell idea. Most parents and non-educators kind of say, that makes sense. So let's do it. And that's why we have seen these things happening in many countries. The other one is a narrowing curriculum, this kind of a knowledge-based idea that this is what kids need but it's not always what the kids need. It's more often what we can measure, how we can measure, how the schools compete and which school is better than the other, or these days even which education system is better than the other one. So we have seen this literacy and numeracy and science, kind of a very narrow idea of what school education is all about, and the purpose of education has been narrowed to focus on those things. Not everywhere, but in many countries. And then obviously we have also witnessed the movement of what I call test-based accountability, meaning that standardized assessments have been increasingly used for the purpose of accountability, holding schools and principals and school systems accountable for the test results. And that's why I think that's one of these things that is on the rise here in New Zealand. Am I right again, that this is where we're going? And then the other thing that around the world has manifested itself in a different ways, this undervaluing, undermining the role of the professional role of teachers by opening teaching profession to all kinds of people. If you have seen kids anywhere in some countries, if you know any children, you are qualified to teach. And in some other places, you can't get anywhere near the school without higher education degree and qualifications. But these are some other things, and there may be some more that could be added to this. So I invite you to take a look if you're interested in reading literature or research. There's a lot of research about this term, this type of movement idea, how it has impacted different education systems. Go and find it. So, if this is true, that we have seen this type of movement globally dominating many national education policies and reforms, which I think the research evidence makes it clear that something like this has been there. OECD itself, for example, is not using the term, but identifies a similar type of trends in the past. Michael Fullan and Andy Hargreaves and many others have been, in their recent writings, using this same type of thing. So let's assume for a moment that this is true thing, that it's not just a fabricated idea. Then I think we have reason to ask a number of questions. Like, if we have been doing this germ thing for the last 30 or so years, we should be able to see some outcomes, some changes in our education systems globally. And here are some of the questions that we can ask. What has happened to the quality of education outcomes, student learning? So kids should be learning better now because of these new ideas. How about the equity of these outcomes? How fair the education systems have become because of these policies? How about the student engagement or their sense of belonging in their school? Are the kids more happy, more engaged, to come to school and think that this school is a cool place to be? And how about the teaching profession? Are we seeing more teachers going to school and seeking this profession because they think that education is what it should be? And I'm showing you this because now we have much more data than we ever had to say something about this. So here we need to be careful. So I'm going to show you some trends. So this is not a study of any one particular research project or institution. I have tried to put together something like this for over many years. So collecting data from the OECD and international organizations like UNESCO and individual national studies as well, and try to kind of estimate what the state of education would be. Are you with me so far? Okay, so I'm going to show you this, and I'm sure that this will raise some concerns. Let's take a look at some of the trends, not all of them, but obviously the one that is probably one of the most interesting is the quality of student outcomes. In other words, how children around the world do in reading, mathematics, science, some of those things that are measured. We don't know anything about any other things. So if you ask about arts is very important. We have no idea what it is. If you ask about primary education, we have very little information about how kids learn in a primary school or in the end of the senior secondary school. So this data that you see here is usually somewhere there in the middle of the schooling, typically when the kids are between the lower secondary and upper secondary school. It's an important part of the system. So here you can see, and this obviously comes primarily from the OECD's PISA program for international student assessment. It's interesting, the study is, as you know, that is run every 3 years. So it started in year 2000. And in the beginning, the first 3 cycles, 2000, 2003, and 2006, and 2009 showed a kind of an improvement. And there was a moment in that history 20 years ago when some people were saying that finally we can show that more data, more assessments will help school systems to improve. But then somewhere there in the 2010, we started to see the decline. And since then, the last 15 years, there has been virtually no improvement in student achievement in the OECD countries, including the Southeast Asia now. Why do you think this is happening? Was that? Germany is probably, hopefully, something there. But something started to happen in 2010, 11, globally, everywhere. Smartphones. Yeah, exactly. That's one of those things that has been for a long time denied, that there's no evidence that the technology or digital media and technologies, kind of handheld stuff, would have anything to do with this. It's a little bit similar to cigarettes. Remember, there's like 50 years ago, there was a fierce debate about whether cigarette smoking has anything to do with the lung cancer. And now we know that if you're a heavy smoker, you smoke like continuously. No one does in New Zealand, I know that. Your risk of getting into trouble with cancer, like lung cancer, is about 80 or 90%. But we still can prove that if you smoke, you're going to die in cancer. And it's the same here in education, that we can prove that even the heavy users and gamers and those who spend 12, 13, 14 hours with the devices would end up being poor learners or have mental health issues. We can't show that. But the risk is high. And that's why we are looking at this now. The next one, I'll show you a couple of these things. Next one is the equity of outcomes. And all the evidence in the world shows the same thing, that we have been going downhill when it comes to education systems' ability to serve and help all kinds of kids and families. So equity in education has not improved. Actually, it has gone worse in many, many parts of the world, including Finland and Australia as well. The third one here is the student well-being, particularly mental health. And this has probably less to do with the schools, but school is an important place to kind of respond to this situation. And I think many school systems haven't done this yet, that they treat well-being as a kind of a treatment when the problem has already occurred, rather than try to think about what our school should look like if it was really trying to prevent some of these things happening. So that data is very evident. And then we have student sense of belonging or engagement. Many studies today say that student engagement in their schooling or their sense of belonging is all-time low. This is true in Victoria, all across Australia. One thing that we can see that is that more kids than ever will be in homeschooling, or just dropping out, don't go to school. One more, and while you hold your devices up, that's fine. You know, the status of teaching is the same thing. In 2011, the OECD and Education International established the International Summit on the Teaching Profession, exactly because they saw that what's going to happen 15 years ago, that the teaching profession is at risk. And now we can see this almost everywhere around the world. It's harder and harder to find young people who want to teach, and it's harder and harder to keep those who have been teaching for a long time in schools and continue to do what they do best. Now, how many of you feel a little bit like depressed? How many of you feel like I'm going to change my job? Don't go, because we need people like you here in New Zealand more than ever before. So this is not a good picture. In a moment, I'm going to ask you, so what's your takeaway from this? How would you respond to the media or your local politician or somebody asking, so how can you explain this? But for those here who say that, okay, give me some good news. There must be some good news. I'm going to show you some trends that have been going upwards. Okay? One of them is the technology. We have more computers or technology per student now than ever before. Since 2000, in the last 10 years, this rate in the OECD has grown 4 times what it was 10 years ago. So it means that we have a lot of technology in schools across the OECD, here, Australia and Finland as well. Now you might say that, you know, if If this correlation was causation, it would mean that computers have actually made teaching and learning worse. But that's something we can't say. But what we can say is that the investments in technology yet have not brought these promised improvements. It may happen now with the AI and some other things, but still we haven't seen that the kids are learning better or doing these things that we are measuring better because of the technology. The two other things are that we have more data and evidence than ever before. More research articles and journal articles and books and podcasts and blogs have been prepared than ever before during the last 20 years. A lot. And we are spending more money per student than ever before. Can you find this kind of a disturbing? I find it like, how do I make sense out of this? But I'll give you a couple of snippets, and then I'm going to ask you what your takeaway is. So this is what the OECD concluded just before the pandemic, some 5-6 years ago. So this is not just my conclusion. This is what the OECD, that is a global authority of these issues, have said all along a long time ago, that we haven't really seen improvement, although spending has increased. So this is what the student achievement in OECD countries globally looks like. And if you take a look at this year 2000, where we started to collect this systematic data about not only the student achievement in reading, math and science, but also the equity issue, like what are the achievement gaps there, we realized that between the lowest quarter of socio-educational or economic kids and the most affluent kids equals about 3 years at the age of 15. It's a big gap between it basically means that poor kids, the kids with the poor families or communities have this disadvantage. So during the 25 years, nothing has happened. Actually, these gaps have got a little bit bigger. Michael Fullan, who's a good friend of mine, I had a conversation about this with him a few months ago. And Michael writes in his latest book that all those efforts that we have done around the world to try to fix this seem to make things worse. So remember this when you think about what your conclusion is. And then the student sense of belonging. This is a kind of an emerging thing in a global narrative when we are looking at how do we define the performance of education systems. That we are beginning to include this idea of how young people are kind of linked to what's happening in the school, their engagement, or in this case, sense of belonging. These are some of the questions that the researchers and the OECD is asking when they're collecting data from schools and different countries. And I'm just going to show you quickly a summary. This is a little bit hard graph to read, but basically what this shows you is the change of students' sense of belonging in different countries during between 2003 and 2023. So we are looking at the 20-year gap here. So if you're below the zero, all these red things means that students' sense of belonging has gone worse. And those green things, few countries there, have been able to improve the student sense of belonging. So here in New Zealand and Australia, we see almost 20 percentage point decline, meaning that 1% point every year going backwards. So this says that kids here in Australia and in Finland, most other countries, feel that they're less kind of attached to their own schools. It's a very bad news. And now, this is my last one here, that if you still think that I'm just kind of making this up for you to depress people and make you feel really bad, the worse than you should, just take a look at what the leading international organizations said about the time when the pandemic hit. UNESCO said that there was about 300 million people, young people, who were not in school, who were supposed to be in school, and those who went to school didn't learn what they needed to learn in school. It's a very kind of a gloomy, dark. The OECD has been reminded policymakers and ministers and finance ministers around the world about these achievement gaps and how costly they are around the world, at least for the last 20 years. Year after year, same recommendations about better address these things. And then the World Bank, where I used to work for a number of years, in the Human Development Report in 2018, went even further by saying that we have a global learning crisis because of these things. So this is not just something that happened all of a sudden, or this is not something that happens somewhere. This is a global situation. Is anybody here who has that you heard something interesting? What is the takeaway that you want to share? Yeah.
Talking about the health sector, and that when we measure outcomes in the health sector, we don't just focus on what the doctors do and the hospitals do in intervention. We turn back to society and we talk about individuals and the healthy things we can do in the community. And I think in education we constantly come back to the school and the teacher having to be the solution, rather than actually taking a step back and recognising that it's individual, society, and actually dealing with the causes that underlie the outcome.
Excellent. I'm going to get back to your point a little bit later here. Is there anybody here who would like to... I try to be inclusive here, so these back row boys here.
I've got a Pasi, I've got it.
Okay, all right, thank you. He's faster than me. All right, go ahead.
Kia ora, ko Eliza Bartlett, tōku ingoa. I'm a secondary teacher at Wellington College. Question, you said in your graph that showed trends since 2000, you showed that devices per student or tech per student had gone up radically, and then you said, but we can't say that's part of the problem. And my question is that just because we don't have enough data, or you actually don't think it's part of the problem? Because I'm very interested to see what happens if we severely reduce tech in the classroom.
The technology. Yeah, actually the OECD did in 2015 a good study or survey about exactly this question. And the outcome was that the technology has not been able to improve students' learning in I think it was mostly mathematics. Actually, the results were going backwards. In other words, the more you use technology for teaching and learning in school, the worse kids were learning. It didn't get any big space in the media because some people don't like that type of news, particularly those who have signed the checks for schools, so hundreds of millions of dollars. Let me continue a little bit. Remember, we have, I'm going to give you another moment probably to think about something like this, because I have something. Do you want to have a right answer to this, my question? What's the conclusion? There's no right answer, obviously, but my takeaway is clearly this, and I've been thinking about this a lot, more than you think. Kind of a plain conclusion of all this data, all these things and research that you read is that it doesn't make any sense that we try to improve, continue things, improve our education systems or schools by doing the same things that we have done before. Because it is like somebody said, a definition of insanity. Do you know who said this first? Many people say that it was Albert Einstein. And that was one of the candidates for my quiz question. Because most people would say that, yeah, it must be Einstein because I saw it somewhere. But actually, the truth is much more beautiful than that. Because Einstein, there's no evidence that Einstein ever said that. This was first said by Rita Mae Brown. I don't know if you know this feminist writer in the US. She's about 85 years old now. She wrote a book in 1983 called Sudden Death, where this line is first time recorded officially. So isn't it interesting that Einstein gets all the credits of all kinds of things only because he was a smart physicist? Now my second part of today is about thinking differently, because it's easy to say that, we should not continue doing the same things over and over again because it doesn't make any sense. But this thinking differently is a bold thing that only very few politicians or system leaders or policymakers dare to do. There's one jurisdiction in Australia, I don't know how much you follow up things happening in Australia, there's one place that has been thinking differently during the last 3 years, much more so than any other place in Australia. Do you know what it is? Which state I'm talking about? Which is the real education state in Australia right now? That is not Victoria. South Australia, beautiful place, like a world-class movement to defend and protect public education. So take a look, go and visit, see the schools, meet the people. I have been working with about 300 South Australian early childhood, primary and secondary principals and leaders during the last 3 years, and I can tell you that it's real. It's not just lip service. It's a real thing that is happening there. Amazing leadership, starting from challenging the conventional narrow purpose of education and including young people and communities and teachers and everyone into building this new idea, this new strategy for public education, better than I've seen anywhere else in the world right now. So that's where my hope is. If they give up, I go back to Finland. Don't tell that to anyone. Okay, some things. There's one example. I'm going to show you this little 15-second clip. I started to think about what would be a kind of a good example of inspiration for doing things very differently and getting better outcomes. It comes from sports. Track and field sports. I don't know how many of you are following this, but in 1968 in Mexico City Olympics, something strange happened. By 1968, everyone, all those who were jumping, the high jump, you try to jump the bar, were using exactly the same style. And it's this, I don't know what it's in English, but you kind of flip around the bar. How do you call that in English? Yeah, it's just kind of a roll over. And then this one guy called Dick Fosbury came to the Olympics and used completely kind of a funny, everyone was laughing like, you cannot do it like this. But this is what it looked like. And can you imagine that you're the only one who does something like this and everybody else is doing the good old ways. He and his team did physics because it's all about physics. And they realized that there must be another way to put your kind of a center of mass that you can put it kind of higher. And they realized that if you do it that way, you can climb higher. By 1968, the world record was 224, I think it was. And many people say that a human being can't jump higher than that. It's physically impossible to do. He changed the style, and now the record is 245 or something like this. And he won the gold medal there. So what does it mean for us? It's the same thing that we have to be bold, and rather than try to do, train and teach and practice and invest more in this old style of doing things, we have to step out and say, how can we do this in a different ways? And there's no better time to do that than right now. What breaks my heart when I have a conversation with young people, including my own, is that barely 5 years ago when we had this pandemic, remember the COVID? You still remember that? Most policymakers don't. Because that time we made these promises to young people, and I published a number of articles saying that when this hell is over, you're going to see a brand new school where the well-being will flourish and students have voice and agency, and schools will be communities where we care about one another and have a relationship, all these things. And now we look around the world and it's like the COVID never happened. And we have to be true to these promises that we made in our minds or in writing or speaking to these young people. And that is the kind of a serious part of this. But going back to your question, you asked about the role of what's actually influencing student learning. This is the 101 of teaching or education. So all of us, we need to be aware of this. But I've been surprised how little we actually have a conversation about this question, that what influences student school outcomes. And we all know, if you're principal or teacher, you know that I may have the same curriculum, same instruction, same teaching method, same arrangements, and kids are in a classroom. They come from the same community, but they still learn very differently. But when you're busy in your school, you don't have time to think about this, that why these kids are not learning the same way. That was my first question as a teacher, that I didn't understand that. Why these kids in my class, when I teach physics or mathematics, they learn these things so differently. Have you ever thought about that? Sometimes, yeah. Okay. So then if you have thought about that, then you can probably answer this question here. So to make this a little bit easier for you, I have 4 different categories here that could be included, kind of answer this question, that where the influence comes from. Teacher, leadership, and some other arrangements. There's out of school factors, this kind of a community thing that you were talking about. And then there's the mystery that we don't know, kind of an uncertain factor. Now, without going any further, which one of these colors do you think is a teacher? Put your hand up if you think it's blue. Sorry to say, you're all wrong. Because, the teacher is the green. Now, and this goes back to your question that you were asking earlier. You know, most people, if you're a teacher union person, you love to think like this, that, you know, it's 60% of the variability is about teachers, but think twice. Because if you think like this, then of course, we have to take a lot of this criticism that people say that why kids are not learning or why they're learning differently, because you're not a good teacher. Try harder. Okay? So, you know, this is what we have known for at least for the last 60, 70 years. It's one of the best known things in education. And obviously, you know, this doesn't mean that there's a teacher or there may be even a school where the people can make miracles. But statistically, you know, this is where we need to build our assumptions about the work that we do in a school. The teacher influence is about 10%. Some studies show much lower. Some studies show about 15%. But you know, this is what it is. Principal is the second biggest in-school factor, but 60% of the variability is outside of the school gate, which means, just like you said, that we often don't have much control over. It's about the mother's education, it's about the community, it's about what type of peers and friends your students have in the community, who their neighbors are, and many other things that we can't change. For example, James Coleman, who did the famous study in the 60s, concluded that it's still true around the world. Now, what do you think about this? How would this thinking differently, change the way you think about your work or your school? I would say that whenever there's a conversation or debate about what kids learn or don't learn in a school, the response always has to be that, just like you said, that the community has to do more. We need schools that are more about kind of a full-service school model type of schools, that you have some of them here in New Zealand, we have some of them in Australia, and they are flourishing, coming up now all over the world, where kids get not only treatment to their well-being or health issues, but they get support early on to make sure that they feel better. So that is a very important aspect of the conversation. I'm going to show you one thing just to make my point clear about how unclear the equity has been in the policy and political conversations, particularly in Australia. I have worked so hard during the last 5 years to try to help the ministers and ministries and governments to think harder about, when we talk about equity, what are we talking about? And this data this is the recent data from Australia, where at the year 3, where we do the first NAPLAN, the standardized assessment in reading and mathematics. So this is what the data shows, that the kids, in this case John, who comes from the poorer family, is about 2 years behind of Lisa, who comes from a more affluent. It can be anyone. So in the beginning of the school journey, there's a big gap. Now, what we say and what these policymakers say, that come to school and we will fix this, okay? So we're going to do everything that this gap will narrow by the end of the schooling. And that is the ideal of schooling, right? But guess what? It's not happening in Australia, and it's not happening in most other places. So this is a journey that they go through the year 9 when they do the last NAPLAN test, basically the same assessment. And so the gap is grown to 5 years. So what the school is actually doing is to amplify these disadvantages and advantages that we have. So we should actually tell parents that bring your kids to school and we make them more of what they look like when they come to school. In a way, you know, it's a big lie to say that we will help your kids to do well, because we are not. Some kids do, many of them might, but in general, you know, this is what the picture looks like. So we often, in a policy, kind of a political mind or policy-making mind, we confuse equality and equity. And people say, you know, every child, every family has an equal opportunity to good schools. That's not true. So that's why the governments need to do more to address this thing. Now, in Australia, this has gone so far that there's very little anymore that even governments can do, because the genie is out of the bottle and it's very, very difficult to get it back. Just like in Sweden, that used to be very equal. I'm going to show you the other one, and you know, this is the interesting data from the latest OECD PISA study showing Australia. It might be the similar thing here. Again, a little bit hard to read, but let me explain to you what you see here. So we are looking at the 15-year-old students' mathematics scores in the last PISA study. Okay. And here you see, just as an example, the OECD average, then Finland, Australia, Estonia, Korea, New Zealand is somewhere there where Finland, Australia is, and some high-performing countries. And now because we have a lot of data that we can basically calculate correlations of some of the school and student characteristics and how they correlate with the kids' performance. So basically what I've done here is to group the students in 4 different groups. The blue one is the top quarter of any of these characteristics or features, and the orange one is the bottom one. Let me show you the example here. Sense of belonging. So in this blue quarter, 25% are all those kids who show higher sense of belonging in the school. Because the PSI is collecting this data as well. Students answer some of these questions that you saw before. So this blue includes in Australia all those kids who say that school is a cool place. I feel like it's easy for me to make friends and I'm happy in school. And the orange are the kids who are the opposite. School sucks, I don't like it, nobody likes me, teachers hate me and so on, it's not my place. Now, we can see how these kids in these quarters perform in the test. Are you with me? Okay, so I'm going to show you this one here. So those kids who have a stronger sense of belonging perform about 26 points better than the kids who don't. And obviously there may be many reasons why some kids don't have a strong sense of belonging. Sometimes they are kids in the same school. So what works for one kid doesn't work for the other one. Are you surprised about this? Because it equals to about 1 year worth of learning. That's a big gap, it's huge. Just by having kids in the school who have stronger sense of belonging. Next one is the staff shortages. So we are looking at kids in the top quarter who have the least shortages of educational qualified staff in the school, and compare that to the bottom quarter, the kids who have the most lack of adults in the school. Everybody knows what's happening here. It's about 50-point difference. So this is how much the qualified adults in a school play a role according to this study. It's about 2 years worth of learning. So kids in a school where there's always shortages of adults and staff tend to do that much worse. Student-teacher relationships. What do you think about this? Do you think it's more or less than the previous one? The kids who say that they have a good, healthy, positive relationships with the teachers, they like me, I like my teachers, and we talk to one another and so on. Is it more? You're right, it's 59 points. Again, about 3 years worth of schooling. When I talk about this data in Australia and elsewhere, I always want to know, kind of curious, what are you doing in your school to maximize the opportunities to build these relationships in your school? And oftentimes I don't hear other than we talk about it. I haven't heard anybody telling me that we have changed the structure of the school or the schedule of the school days so that kids have more time to interact and build these relationships. My kids, when they go to school in Melbourne, don't really have any time to do that. The most of the time is scheduled for instruction. If you go and see the schools in Finland, they do about half of the instruction time in primary school than in Australia, probably here as well. And there's a lot of time for this type of thing to happen. Finally, the students' curiosity. Students say that when I go to school, I can explore and investigate, research things that I'm interested in. I can ask questions, and teacher asks questions from me. We have a kind of a what happens if culture in the school. What do you think about this? Is it higher or lower than the before? Now, if you're smart, you look at the trend here, but it doesn't always work like this. It's about 3 years worth of learning. Just by having a curious culture built in the school that you can't often do without these relationships and staff shortages and sense of belonging. But my point here is that there are many other ways to improve students' learning than introduce different or one teaching method or ask teachers to teach in a particular way. Here's the test for you that you had before. Remember? Very quickly. So a bat and a ball together cost $110. The bat cost $100 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And you probably wonder why the hell I'm showing this one here. I'm showing this one here because this looks like, you look at this and you say, that's easy. And it's exactly like policymakers and politicians when they look at the school, kind of a logic of the school reforms. That's easy, I have an answer to this thing. What's the answer here? $5. Did anybody say 10? Some people did. Okay, let's see in the end. This is the point of the intuition, that we should not, with a thing like this, act as based on the intuition only. We should stop and think what this is really asking. You know, that's why we have this response to the post-COVID thing, is that we, in most, not only here in New Zealand, but in many other places, that we kind of think that we need to do, the solution is to do more of the things that we did before, rather than, you know, doing things in a different way. So that's why this, the previous problem. So let me summarize here. Do you know who said this one? It's a great line. It's American old baseball player, Yogi Berra. Yeah, the future is not what it used to be. But how true is that now? You know, this people say, when he said this many years ago, he said, "What do you mean by that?" But now, when you think about this, think about our kids, young people in our schools. How true is this? This future that we think about, or they think about now, is not what it used to be when I was young. It's a very different thing. So, you know, my colleagues and friends have this type of surveys and work with the young people around the world, but mostly in North America, asking what young people, what do they want when they come to school, and not just learn in a school, but look at some of these things that comes through those interviews and conversations. Yeah, very few people, kids are saying that I want to have a high test scores in a school. That when you sit down with them and really talk about the future and what they need, these are some of the things. Most young people want to do good things. And there are so many people who don't believe that. They say, no, you know, if you give them freedom and let them go, let them loose, they're going to do horrible things and get into trouble. But my experience is not this. That I can recognize some of these things in many or most of the conversations, that if you really sit down with young people and have a reasonable chat with them face to face, these are the things that hear more now than ever before. They want to be part of something good. They want to do good things for themselves, be happy and healthy in this crazy world. Sometimes when I look at my own children, I just can't understand how they can cope and deal with all these horrible crimes and things and hate, discrimination and inequalities that they hear. We have the radio news open every morning and evening, so we listen to what's going on there. My 14-year-old sometimes is really depressed about hearing this. He's asking that, so is the Third World War coming? And I said, just do your homework. Your teacher's going to be upset tomorrow if you don't. And I said, how bad is that? you know, these are some of the assumptions that just want to show you my personal reflection, inviting you to do the same thing during today and tomorrow when we have this conversation. What are your foundational assumptions when you think about your students, your own children, young people overall? And these, I'm just going to offer you my 3 things that I've been thinking about since the pandemic, really. The first one is that I think that the students have much more capability to do good things for themselves that we give them credit for. This is my kind of a starting assumption, belief in any action, in a school improvement, curriculum development, or whatever it is about education. I always base my thinking and what I'm saying and doing on this, because I think that this is true. Not obviously with everyone, but it's hard to say something that would apply to each and everyone. The second one, equally important to me, is that freedom to be free in school or at home, and the sense of agency, the feeling that I'm in charge, are essential elements of the well-being. And because they are critical elements of the child well-being, they are important part of their learning. There are studies that show that this steady decline in young people's mental health over the last 30 years, that you saw there in the beginning, that there's a causal link. Listen to this. There's not correlation, there's a causal connection between the shrinking freedom, or they call the child independent mobility, CIM, during the 30 years in school and at home, that is driving young people crazy. Because they never have this feeling of being in charge. I can decide. I can get into, this is what I tell my own kids, that get into good trouble. Good trouble is good. Because you will learn how to kind of manage yourself in there. And you will realize that it's part of your being free. And my last one here is that trust schools and they will lead change. Yeah, give me a good hand here. Thank you. This is what we need to communicate. It's just give us freedom, trust us, and we'll know what to do. Not in everything and not entire autonomy, but kind of a collective, I call it a collective autonomy that the schools need now more than ever before. So these are mine. I invite you to create yours and think about these things, because it's important for people we have conversation with, that they understand how do I think about these things, or why did I say things that I'm saying. Here are some of the last things here. So this is not my slide deck. This goes to a podcast of somebody who I wish was here and has been actually here, called Gert Piesta from the Netherlands or Scotland. So listen to this podcast where he's talking about the purpose of education. He was in Melbourne a few months ago and sat down with my colleague and had this conversation about what is the purpose of education. He has a particular way of defining what's the point of schooling from the perspective of students and teachers as well. There's another one, Ken Robinson, who was a good friend of mine, passed away 5 years ago. And Ken sometimes answered the same question, that what is the purpose of education, this way. That there's a personal purpose, something that we help individuals to do good things and develop in a way that they can lead their own lives. There's a cultural purpose that will help us to pass the traditions and cultures and values forward. And then the economic one, that young people will be able to be part of, take care of themselves. Until now, and still in many countries, the economic purpose is the only one. Employment, labor, the income and all those things. But now we see around the world, even OECD is now turning this thing around, that there has to be other purposes than just the economic or employment. That is very important, but it's not the only one. That's the other thing. I would actually like to add here a fourth dimension that came to my attention about a year ago. Remember this case when there was 2 astronauts in the International Space Station last year? They went there for 8 days, and they ended up being there for 8 months. And the BBC journalist, somewhere in the 4th month point, where they have been there already 4 months and did have no idea when they're getting back in the space station, asked this question of one of these astronauts, that you must be panicked, horrified, that you've been here 4 months and you have no idea when you're getting back home. And he said this, that not at all, because 90% of our training is preparing for the unexpected. And this is my 4th dimension of the purpose. To think about the world now, particularly from the point of view of young people, that we need to prepare them for the unexpected as well. Not only preparing them for the test. Like, did you hear the news from Queensland, Australia yesterday? There was a year 12 test, and some schools were given wrong information to teach children about the wrong Caesar. Rather than teaching about Julius Caesar, that was a test question, they were teaching Augustinus Caesar. Horrible, national scandal. Can you imagine that? Preparing them for unexpected. I think that this would be a good thing, to prepare them, prepare to say something about any Caesar. So here's my kind of a goodbye for you, and thanks for bearing with me. But I was thinking about this. I really value what the collective is doing and bringing so many people here this morning and for these 2 days together. I thought I can't leave this stage without answering this question that somebody has, so what should we do? And I'm sure that the collective has been thinking about these things. But I think the one thing that we need to do, probably more here in New Zealand and Australia than many other places, is to be much more kind of careful in how do we communicate and help everyone to communicate this, what I call the myth of evidence-based practice in education. I have nothing against evidence. I'm a scholar, I do research. I love evidence-based things. But how it's turned into policies and politics is just absolutely wrong. This is what happens in many places, that that the politicians kind of dream of finding this silver bullet, this one method that works. But we do know that it's impossible. That the thing that they call evidence-based teaching is impossible to do. There is no such method or kind of a magic. But then nevertheless, some of these people, they just they have a faith in impossible. And then they go forward and implement something that every teacher, every school, and every student have to do everywhere. We see this in Australia, in England, in the United States, many other countries right now. I'm saying this because I think that the collective would be, rather than giving a short story like this is a short version, work with the schools and principals and leaders to help them to gain this, what I call evidence literacy, to understand, have this narrative in a way that everybody, the kids and teachers and communities would understand that in education we are not in a business of medicine. We don't run randomized controlled trials to test the treatment, the new policy like here in New Zealand, the new curriculum. And we couldn't do that because there are so many we can't control those variables just like they do in medicine. So that's why we need to behave in a different ways. But that is one important thing. Then the other one is that when you do that, talk about the side effects in education policies and reforms. Nobody ever does that. I don't know if it has happened here, whether your policymakers or government or minister has stepped in when she's talking about the new policy, saying that but if you do that in your school, these are these things that may happen. It's usually this little text in the bottom of the medicine bottle in medical treatments. Have anybody ever warned you about the side effects? No. That's something that the collective could do. Help people to not only think about what these side effects are, but how do we communicate these to the community and the society so that people would understand that, introducing phonics test may be a good thing for some people, or insisting everybody to use explicit teaching or direct instruction in a classroom every day works for some kids. But there's no method that says that 100% of kids will benefit from this. Actually, there are studies showing that 70% kids will learn better, but 30% will not. And some of them actually will go backwards, never come to school again. So that is something that I would love to see here happening more at the level of collective and communities like this. And the last one here, I was looking at the OECD's Trends Shaping Education, the recent report a few months ago. This is what is included there as a big important thing, that we need to educate our kids to also to resist or oppose the kind of a populist thinking and ideas that are growing now. And it's not going to stop here. It's not going to stop what's happening in the United States or Europe in some countries. It's only going to get worse. And one day we're going to see it here in Australia and this part of the world as well. And kids need to know what it is and how to deal with that as much as they need to learn how to read and count. But that is the critically important evidence also when we think about the future. Are you with me? Now, I'm going to give you the right results, but that's my kind of a conclusion that, what if we thought about the future so that it's not about hunting the best practices around the world and then try to implement those, whether they're based on evidence or not, in all the schools. If we truly would engage our young people, students, as agents of this change, a journey for the future, might that be something that would make a difference? I think so. So here we go. The first one, put your hand up if you think that this is right. Keep your hand up if you answer that this is right. Some people are putting hand down. Okay, yeah, this is true. The second one, teachers account for about 60% of the variance in students' achievement in school. Is it right or wrong? It's unfortunately, yeah, here. How many of you have still two correct? Okay, good. The last one, does the ball cost $10? No. How much was it? $5. Okay, so it's wrong. Now, here's the moment of truth. Put your hand up if you have all three right. 25 people. Put your hand up if you have two correct. 50 people. 75. Put your hand up if you have only one right. Oh, good. So what is left here? Is there anybody who got all wrong? Okay, come here. I'll give you my book. Because, all the others, they know already everything, but enjoy the book. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm gonna leave the stage with my favorite. Do I have any dog lovers here in the room? Anybody who loves dogs? Most of us, okay? So this is my favorite dog video that is actually very much linked to what teachers and principals do day in and day out here in New Zealand and Australia. Take a look at this. Thank you very much.